Hey there, and welcome to the first video of the last chapter in the Python Fundamentals course. In this chapter, you will learn all about how you can use Python to interact with different types of files on your computer. The skills that you will acquire in this chapter will undoubtedly improve your Python programs. In this video, we will be specifically looking at text files, learning about how we can use Python to open, read from, write to, and properly close a text file. With that said, let's get started. Before we go in and start talking about how we can use Python to handle files on our file system, let's first think about why we would want to do that in the first place. Now, so far, we have been storing data related to our programs in variables, and these variables are stored in our computer's memory. So these data can only be accessed during the runtime of our Python programs, and as soon as our program terminates, these data are lost forever. Now you may see where this gets a little problematic in certain real-life situations, where it's better to store data permanently. And in those cases, we would store those data on our computer's hard drive as files, so the data can be preserved permanently and we can access them whenever we want. In this video, we will be focusing on one of the most common and important types of files, which is a text file. And these files are denoted with a file extension .txt. We're going to learn about how we can use Python to open, read, and write to those files. Before we get started working with those text files, let's first use the function os.listdir to see which text files are available in our current working directory, which is just another name for the folder in which our Python program lives. So we want to import os and iterate through the items in the list returned by os.listdir. So for each item in this list, if the item ends with this substring .txt right here, then we would print out the item. So running this cell, we can see we have two files in the current working directory that end with an extension .txt. We have another file.txt and text file.txt. And just to give you a look at those files, we have text file.txt right here and another file.txt right here. The first thing we need to do in order to read from or write to a text file using Python is to open that text file. To open a file using Python, we can use the open function, which takes two arguments. The first one being the name of the file or the path leading to that file, and the second one is going to be the mode in which you open the file. Here are four possible values for the mode argument. We have the default value of R, which would open the file in a read-only mode. And then we have the A mode and W mode for appending and writing. And we're going to talk about the differences between those two modes in just a moment. And lastly, we have the R+ mode for both reading and writing. For the file name parameter, you can directly pass in the name of the file if the text file is located in the current working directory of your Python script. Otherwise, you'll need to pass in the absolute path leading up to that file. So here, since textfile.txt is located in the current working directory of our Python script, then we can pass this string directly into the open function and store the data or store the result in the variable file. By default, if we don't pass in a mode value, it's going to be R by default. And if we have textfile.txt in another location on our computer, then we'll have to specify the entire path to that file and pass this string into the open function and store the result in file. If I print out file and its type, we're going to see file has a name, textfile.txt, mode of R, and the encoding right here. which we can also specify in the open function as well if we would like to. And it's of class io.textio wrapper. And this is how we can open a file using Python. Now, after we finish doing whatever we need to do with a text file or any other file, we should always close the file connection using the .close method of the file object so we can free up the resources related to that file. Consequences of not closing a file is not doing that can impact the performance of your program, because the program may take up more memory than is necessary, and if you have enormous files, that may slow down your computer. And sometimes modifications made to a file may not even show up until you close the connection. So we want to write file, which is the variable we defined up here, and then write .close at the end. So we're calling the .close method of file. Running this, the file is now closed. Let's take a look at this segment right here and think about whether this file would be closed. So first we define a variable and store the result of this open function. We open textfile.txt in a read-only mode. And on line 2, we print out the result of a simple arithmetic operation. And on line 3, we close the file connection properly. So everything should be working fine, right? Now, if I run this code, we would actually see a zero division error. And this is just one out of the many errors that may potentially cause your program to crash, because we try to divide 1 by 0, which isn't allowed in math or in programming. And because the program crashed on line 2, line 3 is actually never reached. So this line is actually never run. So Python did not close the file connection properly. And we can check that by printing out the closed attribute of the file object, which is going to give us false. And if I call the closed method again and print out the closed attribute again, we can see true is now the value. In the code above, the file object is not properly closed, since line 2 raised an error that crashed the script. So to prevent that, we can use the with statement. And the benefit of doing that is that the file connection will be automatically closed even if an error is raised before reaching that line. So here's the syntax. In fact, we don't even have to specify the closing of the file connection. It's done internally and automatically. So we would write with, and then space, and then open, so the open function call. And we're opening this and storing it in a variable called file, and then colon. And just like an if statement or a for loop, we would indent the second line and the third line and whatever lines after that with a few spaces. And this is where we write the tasks we want to perform on that file object. And even if I didn't specify the closing of the file object, running this cell, you can see file.closed is actually true, since we don't have to specify the closing of the file object in here or after. That's the benefit of using the with keyword. Now let's talk about how we can read a text file. So if we want to read the data stored in a text file after opening it and before closing it, we can use the following methods. We have .read, .readline, and .readlines. .read reads the entire file, the entire content of the file. .readline reads a single line from the file. And readlines is going to read all the lines from the file and store each line as a string in a list. Let's take a look at how those functions or how those methods work. So I'm going to write with open textfile.txt as a variable called file. Entirety of data is going to be equal to file.read. Printing this variable out, which we can see this variable can be accessed outside the with statement as well. So printing out entirety of data, we're going to see the output matches the content of textfile.txt. And we can actually, let me comment those lines out and uncomment those two lines. If we pass in a value into file.read, then this is going to be limiting the number of bytes returned from the content of the file. You can think about it as the number of characters which is returned by the method. So part of data is going to be the first 15 characters of the file. And printing out part of data, we're going to see congratulations. Now here, I'm going to call the file.readLine method 3 times. And running this cell, we can see we have 5 lines printed out since we have line breaks between those first 2 lines and those 2 lines as well. And the reason for that is, in here, we actually have a line break between the first line and the second line. So between the first line output here and the second line output, or the second actual line of output here, there are actually 2 line breaks. The first one is this line break right here in the text file. And the second one is the line break that the print function automatically has. So if you want to get rid of the line break from the print function, we can specify the keyword argument end and have it be an empty string. So now running the cell, we can see the output is a little bit nicer. Now we can also use the file.readLines method to return the content of the file as a list. So let me run this cell, and we can see 3 strings. We have 1 string, a second string, and a third string in this list. Notice the \n, the new line character in the first 2 strings, since we have a new line here, or a new line character here, and another one right here, although there is none after the third line. If we would like to loop through a file's lines, we can use a for loop. So same opening right here, and for each line in the file, we would print out line and we specify the ending of the display. So we can see the output is right here as well. Now let's talk about how we can write to a text file using Python. The first thing we need to note is the mode in which the file is opened in. We have generally 2 modes. We have W, which stands for write, and A, which stands for append. In W mode, so write, the entire file is erased and rewritten. The internal process may be a little bit different, but essentially the original data is overwritten by the new data. So if I have this file right here, this is the original data. If I open this file in W mode and write hello world, this is going to be the new data stored in this file. On the other hand, if I open this file in A mode, then the new data is going to be appended in the end on line 2, since we have a new line here originally as well. So let's take a look at how we can do this in Python. So I have the with statement right here with open another file.txt in W mode and storing it in a variable called file. I call the .write method of the file object, which is the same for both W mode and A mode. So we're going to write file.write and pass in a string. So running this cell and reloading this tab, we can see new content that replaced the old content indeed replaced the old content. And same thing with the second cell here. We opened it in A mode and called the same method with a slightly different string. Running this, there is no output, but we can see now if I reload this, we're going to see new content that is appended to the old content is indeed appended to the old content. So that's the idea behind writing to a file. Pay attention to which mode you've opened your file connection in. So either W mode or A mode. W mode is going to entirely rewrite your file, and A mode is going to add data to the end of your original data. So a brief summary, we talked about how we can open, close, read from, and write to a simple text file using Python. Now you can create fun projects like potentially a password management system or a login system or a note-taking system, because now you have the ability to store data in text files. And so you can store and read data in and from your computer's hard drive rather than just using its memory. And that's it for working with text files on your computer using Python. In the future videos of this chapter, we will continue exploring how we can use Python to interact with different types of external files on your computer system. In the meanwhile, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Future Programmer if you want to learn more about programming. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.